I was 10 years old when my story takes place. My parents took me up to my aunt and uncle's place in the mountains for a nice long weekend. It's this old cabin tucked into a strand of pine trees, miles and miles from any kind of town. The roads out there are gravel, the nights are blackout. If you stood out on that porch after dark, you couldn't see much beyond the first line of the trees. My best friend Tyler came with us, and at the time it sounded awesome. 2 kids, a mountain cabin, a bunch of cousins, and no school. Yeah, perfect. It stopped being awesome though the night all the adults went out to dinner. There were probably 8 or 9 of us at the cabin altogether. Most of my cousins were older teenagers at the time. Around sunset, the adults piled into a couple of vehicles and headed into town for dinner, leaving Tyler and me behind with this strict instruction not to answer the door and do not leave the house. Neither of us cared. We already had soda, snacks, and cable television. And for about an hour, that night was perfect. We loved being there by ourselves. And then out of nowhere, we start hearing screaming. Faint at first, a single scream from somewhere out in the darkness. Tyler muted the television. We both kind of looked toward the windows. What was that? I shrugged. Coyote maybe? A few minutes later, we hear it again, this time longer, higher pitched. Maybe human. At least it sounded like it. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. Tyler looked at me. Dude, that's not an animal. I didn't answer him because I still wasn't sure. Then it came again, much closer, a horrible shrieking sound that rose and fell like somebody being hurt. We ran to the kitchen and grabbed the house phone. I called the restaurant and an employee answered, so I asked for my dad by name. He came to the phone a minute or so later. Dad, there's somebody screaming outside the cabin. I could hear laughter in the background of the restaurant.
It's probably just an animal, son.
No, it sounds like a person, a real person.
We'll be home in a bit. Just lock the doors and turn on the floodlights.
He hung up and that was that. Now I'll admit my family was kind of loose when it comes to stuff like this. Everything was always nothing. Things can wait till later. Danger was never even close to any of their minds. We checked every lock in the cabin and then sat back down. 5 minutes later, that same screaming would return. This time it was accompanied by a loud grinding noise. The sound would echo through the woods immediately after the scream. Tyler jumped off the couch. All right, dude, what is this? What is going on? What's that noise? I don't know, man. I don't know. Well, this is freaking me out. The grinding stopped, but the screaming kept up. Something slammed outside, a heavy metal crash. Beyond that, I couldn't place any of the sounds. We ran to the front window and there was nothing, just darkness. The porch light illuminated a small patch of gravel and pine needles. Everything beyond that was just black. Another crash erupted from somewhere near the road. A large bang, and then more of that grinding noise. I grabbed the phone and called the restaurant again, and this time my mom answered. Mom, we're hearing screaming and there's some kind of machine now too.
Son, we're eating dinner.
Mom, I'm serious.
So am I.
Then the line went dead. Tyler looked like he was about to cry. Honestly, I wasn't far behind him. The next hour, those noises continued, sometimes close, sometimes further away. Every few minutes, we'd run to a different window trying to at least see something, anything. At one point, I saw movement near the mailbox, a figure maybe, but it vanished before I could actually get a good look. The smell would come next, smoke, gasoline, and Tyler smelled it first. All right, dude, what the fuck is going on? I froze. The cabin suddenly smelled like campfire. We sprinted to the front window and an orange light flickered through the trees. It wasn't much of the time, but the flames were growing constantly. Something was now burning near the road. I called the restaurant a third time and this time nobody answered. I called again, nothing. Again, nothing. Eventually I finally get somebody to pick up and I barely get 2 sentences out before they told me to stop calling. My parents had told the employees not to answer our phone number. I remember just standing there, holding the receiver after the line went dead. I was furious and terrified at the same time because whatever is happening outside is not an animal. I think around 10 o'clock, the noises finally came to an end. The screaming stopped, the buzzing stopped, everything went totally quiet. Neither Tyler nor I slept much because every creak in the cabin sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like somebody trying a door. At one point, I really thought I heard somebody walking across the porch, but neither of us had any kind of courage to go look. We stayed hidden in our sleeping bags until morning. When I woke up, the sunlight was pouring through the windows, and for a second I thought maybe we imagined everything last night. I walked downstairs and every adult was gathered around the kitchen table and nobody was talking. The mood felt accusatory immediately. My aunt looked exhausted, my uncle looked furious. My cousin was crying, weeping. "What happened?" I asked. Everybody looked, but nobody answered right away. Eventually, my uncle stood up, walked to the window, and pointed outside. "Look." I stepped onto the porch and my stomach dropped. The yard looked like a war zone. The mailbox was gone. Splintered pieces were scattered across the ditch. Several trees had deep chainsaw cuts into them. A couple had fallen across the road. The side of my uncle's car looked like somebody had attacked it with an axe. The doors were shredded. The windshield was cracked. Near the road sat this large black burn mark where somebody had piled brush and set it on fire. The scorch mark in grass was still visible. And then I noticed something on the porch. A random pile of dead rodents, squirrels and the like, maybe a dozen of them. All of it read like a message, and I backed away immediately. What happened? My uncle's face hardened, and then, shockingly, one of my cousins answered. My ex-boyfriend. Apparently, the guy had shown up thinking nobody was home. He brought a chainsaw, and when he realized people were still there, at least me and my cousin, he lost his mind. Neighbors later reported that they heard the screaming, the revving the chainsaw, cutting trees, destroying property, setting fires along the road. He got cold feet about the whole thing, though. But the most horrifying part would come next. Our neighbor claimed he'd walked onto the porch several times. Apparently, he'd circled the cabin looking through the windows, looking for people, looking for my cousin. That whole time, we were listening to a violent lunatic tearing apart the property while we sat trapped inside. He could have set the house on fire and we would have been none the wiser. That whining was a small chainsaw that he was using on heavy wood and plastics, even some light metals. If he randomly decided to break a window, we would have been completely alone. There was no cell phones, we had no adults there, nobody to help. Just two terrified kids in a cabin deep in the mountains. The guy was arrested eventually, and I don't remember what happened to him after that, but he and my cousin stopped dating, at least. Thank God. My brother and I have computers set up in this converted attic room at the top of the house. Years ago, it belonged to my older sister, but after she graduated and moved out, the bedroom would become ours. She hated sleeping up there. Anytime somebody asked her why, she'd just shrug and say the room was haunted. I didn't believe her, but the room, I will admit, does feel weird sometimes. One night I'm sitting at my computer clicking through a game, and I get that strange feeling again. The one that makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I glance over my shoulder and, of course, nobody, just my brother still at his desk. I turn back to my screen to go back to my game. I hear footsteps now, pounding up the staircase. Thump, 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 thump. Somebody running. I stop what I'm doing and look toward the staircase door. The footsteps reach the top and then no more noises, no more thumping. The door doesn't open, nobody knocks, it's just silence. Hey, did you hear that? I ask my brother, and he doesn't even look up. Yep, I did. You gonna check it? No. I laugh. The weird thing is, neither of us wants to go because neither of us are bothered. It happens often enough that we just kind of stop talking about it. I guess maybe that was what my sister was talking about the whole time. Some settling walls and floorboards, right? That's all it is. Even though it definitely sounds like somebody is climbing the stairs. Sometimes it'll even feel like somebody's standing right behind your chair. You get this prickly feeling on the back of your neck, like somebody is directly staring at you. You learn to just ignore it. A little while later, my mom appears in the doorway. I'm gonna run to the store for cigarettes. All right, I say back. My brother waves without looking away from his monitor, and Mom disappears downstairs. A few seconds later, we hear the garage door rattle and open up beneath us. We hear a car start up and the engine backs out. The garage door closes a minute later and the sound fades down the street. Routine sounds inside our childhood home. My brother slowly turns to me and says, "Home Alone." I grin back. Finally. The second she's gone, we crank up the music. The speakers are terrible, but they're loud enough to shake the room. My brother starts drumming on the desk with a pencil while I mess around on the computer. For maybe 3 seconds, everything was pretty normal, and then we hear this jingling sound. I freeze, and I guess my brother did too. The sound was coming from the stairwell door. The metal plate on the doorknob has been loose for years. Whenever somebody opens up that door, it rattles, and I'd recognize that sound anywhere. It was a jingle and then a click. The door just swings wide open, and I stare at it. The opening beyond is dark from at least where I'm sitting. Then a voice drifts up the stairs. My mom's voice, clear as day. "Y'all turn that music down." Every muscle in my body locks up. My brother slowly turns to me, and I can tell by his pale face that he heard exactly what I just did. The garage door, the car, her leaving, all of it. Nobody says anything for several seconds. The music just keeps playing. Mom?" I finally manage to say. Nothing. The voice doesn't answer. The music is suffocating. I try to stand up and get some air. "Mom!" Silence. Not a footstep. No movement. Nothing. My brother stands up too, his shirt now sticking to him with sweat. "Don't." I look at him. "Don't what?" "Don't go down there." I try to laugh, but my head is spinning. Am I crazy? What do you mean? What are you talking about? You know what I'm talking about. I do. Mom isn't here. I heard her leave. Still, I end up walking toward the door. The closer I get, the more convinced I become that there's some kind of normal explanation for all of this. Maybe she forgot a purse or a lighter. Either way, I reach the stairwell and there's just darkness leading downstairs. "Mom!" I call one more time. No answer, so I start down. The steps creak beneath my feet and it freaks me the fuck out. Halfway down, I can already see part of the garage. It's empty, but I keep going. No car, no sign of my mom. I walk to the garage window and look outside. The driveway is empty now too. She's gone and we are home alone. I move through the house, checking every single room, the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, all the bedrooms. Everything's empty. The house is dead silent despite somebody just speaking to us moments before. When I finally head back upstairs, my brother is standing right where I left him. His question is obvious. "Well?" I shake my head at him. "She's not here." How the hell is that possible? Dude, I don't know. The music continued playing over our conversation. Nobody wanted to walk over and turn it off. It's annoying, but it also feels like this weird kind of barrier, something to block out any more voices. The rest of the afternoon is pretty miserable. We stay upstairs because we're terrified and neither of us can relax at all. Every little noise immediately gets our attention, and when my mom finally gets home, we practically run downstairs to meet her. The first thing I ask is, "Did you come back after you left?" She looks confused. "What? Did you come back here after going to the store?" "No." "At all?" "No." "You didn't yell upstairs for us to turn down the music." The smile disappears from her face. "What are you talking about?" So I tell her everything, every detail, and she stares bullets at me the entire time. She looks at my brother, but something weird streaks across her face during it too. "Did you hear it too?" she asked him. "Yeah, it sounded exactly like you." My mom folds her arms and fear returns back to her face. She says quietly, "Boys, I never came back." Nobody speaks. What bothers me most isn't really what my brother and I heard, it's my mom's reaction. She looked genuinely disturbed. Not totally caught off guard, if that makes sense, like she's already suspecting something about that room itself. Years later, I would ask my sister about it, so she said she isn't surprised at all, and I tell her about hearing Mom's voice and she just nods at me. Then she says something that sent chills immediately straight through me. "That's why I never slept up there, dude." I stare at her. "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" She shrugs. "Sometimes I'd hear Mom calling my name from the stairs." I wait for her to continue, but she doesn't. Finally, I ask, "When Mom wasn't home?" And my sister nods. We don't know what we were hearing, but something had been perfecting our mother's voice for years, and it obviously practiced it on my sister before it got to me. This happened before cell phones, back when being home alone actually meant being alone. If something went wrong, you had the house phone, maybe a neighbor if they were awake, and that was really it. I was 16 or 17 and my parents had gone out for the evening. The house was quiet except for the television playing in the living room. It was one of those ordinary weekends that blur together after enough years pass. Forgettable, I guess, is what I'll call it. I finished a snack in the kitchen, turned off the lights room by room, and got ready for bed. Before heading upstairs, I let our golden retriever Buddy outside for his final bathroom break of the evening. Now, Buddy was the friendliest dog I've ever known. He loved everybody. Neighbors, delivery drivers, even strangers walking down our street. It didn't matter. He'd greet them all with a wagging tail and a goofy grin. In all the years we had him, I never once even heard him growl. Not at people, not at animals, not even when another dog would steal his food. There wasn't a single aggressive bone inside this dog's body, no killer instinct whatsoever. So I let him outside and he trotted down the back porch per usual. Then, out of nowhere, he suddenly stops and I heard a low rumble. At first, I initially thought that another dog had wandered into our yard or something. I quickly would realize the sound was actually coming from Buddy. He stood completely rigid, staring toward the bushes that lined up in the back fence. His hackles were raised, his head was low. I've never seen him like this before. "Buddy," I called out. He didn't respond or react. The growl actually deepened. I stepped to the edge of the porch and looked off into the darkness. The bushes shifted slightly in the wind, but I couldn't see anything unusual. But then after that, Buddy explodes. He lunges forward, barking aggressively, complete and total pure alarm. It wasn't a normal bark either. It sounded really aggressive, like he was trying to keep something away from our house. My stomach immediately tightened up. Maybe it was a raccoon, a stray cat, but that didn't really make sense. Buddy loves cats. He probably wouldn't have invited a burglar inside if one offered him a treat. I'm being totally serious too. The more I stared at those bushes, the more convinced I'd become that somebody was hiding there. The neighborhood was quiet, no passing cars, no other neighbors outside, just Buddy standing guard at the edge of the yard. "Come here, Buddy," I yelled, but he ignored me. I called again, getting the same reaction. For several more minutes, I stood there on the porch trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. The logical part of my brain kept insisting there was probably an animal in those bushes. The other part kept imagining somebody crouched back there watching the house. I looked toward the neighboring yards, hoping to see a porch light click on or maybe somebody taking out the trash, but there was nothing, nobody. Every house around looked like they were already asleep. Meanwhile, Buddy refused to back down. He would bark furiously, stop for a second and listen, and then start growling again. Whatever this was had his full attention, and it didn't seem to be moving much or leaving. Finally, I go back inside and grab the biggest kitchen knife that we owned. Looking back, it was kind of ridiculous, but at the time it felt better than walking into the dark completely empty-handed. When I stepped back onto the porch, Buddy was still there, barking nonstop. I tried calling him once more and still nothing. Then he turned his head and barked directly at me. It wasn't threatening, if that makes sense. If anything, it felt like a warning, like he was telling me to go inside. Looking back now, I should have listened. Instead, I started down those steps. Buddy paced back and forth between me and the bushes, barking and growling. My heart was hammering so hard, I could feel it in my throat. I gripped that knife tightly in my hand. The yard suddenly felt larger than it ever had before, too. Every step I took seemed to be louder than I wanted it to be, and I kept expecting something to burst out of the darkness. As I got closer, I started hearing this faint rustling sound. Plastic. That was all it was. Plastic moving in the wind. And I felt really stupid in the moment. A grocery bag had snagged on one of the branches, was fluttering softly in the darkness. Relief hit me so hard that I almost laughed. There was nobody hiding in the bushes. Buddy was just being an idiot. "Oh my God," I muttered. "Buddy, seriously? It's a plastic bag, man." I stood there for a second or two shaking my head. The whole thing was ridiculous. Here I am standing in the backyard with a kitchen knife because my dog had declared war on litter. But Buddy kept growling. I took another step and the bag lifted. Not from the wind, it rose straight upward. Every bit of relief that was there had now vanished completely. The top of the bag cleared the bushes, then I saw fingers gripping it. And for a second my brain refused to process what I was actually looking at. A hand appeared, then an arm. Then a man slowly stood up from behind the hedge. He'd been shrouded in leaves and shadows. I don't know how long he'd been crouched there for, 5, 10 minutes, an hour? Who knows? All I did know was that he'd been hiding a few feet from my back porch while I was alone inside that house the whole time. He had a black hoodie, black pants. I couldn't make out his face in the darkness. He simply just stood there, holding that stupid grocery bag while Buddy barked like he'd lost his mind. The man looked directly at me and nobody moved. I was frozen. Then Buddy charged the fence, teeth bared. The man sprang into motion. He climbed over the fence in this smooth movement and dropped into the alley behind our property. I backed away so fast I nearly fell onto the porch steps. Buddy was there still, throwing himself against the fence, barking harder than I've ever heard. I watched through the gaps in the fence and the man didn't run. And I guess that really was the creepiest part. He just kind of walked away. He definitely knew the area. Getting caught didn't seem to bother him at all. Halfway down the alley, he glanced back once over his shoulder and I still couldn't see his face. He continued walking until the darkness just swallowed him up. Eventually, I grabbed Buddy by the collar and dragged him inside. The second the door slammed shut, I locked it and every single window in the house and called my parents. The police would come later and search the yard, and they'd find footprints behind the bushes and signs that somebody had indeed climbed the fence, but they never identified who it was or why he'd been there. Nobody in the other neighborhoods had reported seeing anybody. Nobody knew who he was either. For years after this, people laughed when I told them the story because it starts with a golden retriever growling at a grocery bag. I've never laughed because Buddy was not growling at the bag. He was growling at the man that was holding it. I don't remember exactly how old I was when this happened, 5, maybe 6. Back then, whenever my dad came home, he had his own little ritual. Before he even walked through the door, he'd shake his keys. It was never anything musical, just the jingle of a key ring coming through the house. And that sound meant that Dad was home. The second I heard it, I'd run and hide. Usually I'd squeeze between my mom's legs while she was cooking or folding laundry. Then my dad would come inside pretending he couldn't find me. "Where's my kid?" is what he called it. I'd be giggling so hard I'd practically give away my hiding spot. It happened so often that hearing keys almost became automatic for me. That sound meant safety. It meant Dad. The day all this took place, my mom and I were at my grandmother's house. Now, I don't really know why, but my grandmother's place always felt just like strange to me, even as a kid. One of those houses that seemed like it had some kind of history. The rooms were cluttered, the hallways felt narrow, every sound would carry from one end to the other. A lot of my family lived in that house at different times, including my uncle. I think it was around 10 in the morning, and I know that because my dad wasn't supposed to get home until noon. My mom was downstairs doing something in the kitchen while I played nearby. Then I heard it, the keys, clear as day, exactly the way my dad always did it. I jumped up and immediately said, "Dad's home." My mom looked over at me. "What?" "Dad's home." She laughed. "No, baby, he's not home yet." "Yes, he is." "How do you know?" "I can hear him shaking his keys upstairs." I remember the look that she gave me. It wasn't scared, but confused. She wiped her hands off and followed me toward the staircase. I was excited. I thought my dad had gotten off work early. We climbed up the stairs together, and the second we reached the top landing, the sound stopped. It was just silence. I stood there waiting, but there was nothing more. A few seconds later, we hear keys again, but it's downstairs. The exact same sound. I pointed immediately and told my mom, "Dad's downstairs now." My mom's expression had now changed. I don't remember her being frightened just yet, but she was definitely not smiling anymore. We walked back downstairs, and the sound continued, slow and steady, like somebody standing in one spot casually, shaking a ring of keys. I followed it through the house, and my mom followed, and that sound led us toward the bathroom. The door was closed, and I pointed at it. "He's in there." The keys stopped, and my mom froze. Even as a little kid, it freaked me out. One second she's walking, the next second she's just stopped completely. I looked up at her. She was staring at the bathroom door, neither of us saying anything. We stood there for a while before she finally ushered me back toward the living room. Years later, when I brought that story up, she told me something that I'd never known. She said that as she reached for the doorknob, she got chills across her entire body, not normal chills or goosebumps. She described it as the darkest feeling she's ever experienced, like every instinct inside of her was screaming to not open up that door, that if she did, her and I would have been devoured by whatever was making that jingling sound. So in the moment, she didn't open it. She grabbed me and led me outside. We sat on the porch and waited for my dad to get home, my actual dad, the real one, 2 hours later. When he finally arrived, shaking his keys exactly the way he always did, my mom almost starts crying. And at the time, I'm so young, I don't understand any of this. To me, it was just a weird day. As I got older, I convinced myself that I imagined all of it. Kids make things up, memories get mixed together, dreams become stories, and vice versa. By the time I reached my adulthood, I had written most of it off entirely. Then one day, I ended up mentioning it to my mom. I expect her to laugh and tell me I was just dreaming or something to that effect, but she immediately knew exactly what I was talking about, and before I could even finish my story, she was already nodding. "Oh yeah, that actually happened." That's when she disclosed all those extra details, the feeling of doom, the crying. A knot formed in my stomach, and suddenly it wasn't just a childhood memory. It was real, something that we shared between us. She also reminded me of something else that happened in my grandma's house, something I'd forgotten about completely. The funny thing is that me and my grandma both hated the dark, so we'd leave a light on somewhere and talk until we both fell asleep. One night we were both asleep when my uncle came charging up the stairs, not walking, but running full tilt to the house. The sound woke everybody up, and he burst through my grandma's bedroom door and loomed over us. I sat up in bed where he stood, and I don't remember what happened next because my parents rushed in and quickly took me out of the room. The details would come later. According to my mom, my uncle couldn't talk, literally couldn't talk. He stood there pointing toward my grandma's bathroom, eyes wide with terror. His face was pale, and every time somebody asked what's wrong, he just kept pointing. For nearly 2 hours, he was like this. Eventually, my father opened up the bathroom door and looked in and saw nobody there. My grandma eventually began praying over him, and slowly but surely he calmed down. Eventually he could speak again, but never fully explained what happened. Not then, not ever. And to this day, if the subject gets brought up, he shuts down immediately. According to my family, he's refused for decades to say what he saw in that bathroom. He only says the same thing, that he saw something, but never wants to talk about it. My grandma thinks that he chased something through the house and it went up into the bathroom. I personally don't know what happened in that house. maybe there's some kind of logical explanations for all this. Maybe I was just a kid with a very active imagination. Maybe my uncle experienced some kind of paranoia or panic attack, who knows? Maybe my mom's memory has changed over time just like mine has. I don't know. But what I do know is that I do remember hearing those keys. I remember following those sounds through the house. I remember pointing at a closed bathroom door. And I remember my mom stopping dead in her tracks and refusing to open it up. More than 20 years later, she still says it was the worst feeling she's ever had. It wasn't fear nor anxiety. Something else that she couldn't explain. And every time I think about it, I find myself wondering the same thing. If my mom had actually opened up that bathroom door that morning, what the hell would have been standing on the other side? When I was 5, my mom told us David was dead, and that was that. He was my sister's dad, not mine. And even before he vanished, he was more of a rumor than an actual person. He'd gone abroad years and years earlier, got into some kind of accident, and nobody heard from him again. No phone calls, no letters, no nothing. Eventually, word would spread that he had died, and everybody just kind of accepted it. I did too. So when I was 9 or 10, home alone one afternoon, I nearly fell over when I opened up the door and see him standing there. The knock itself was even strange. It was slow and just really weird. Not like somebody visiting, more like somebody trying to remember how knocking worked. I looked through the frosted glass and saw a man's silhouette standing very close to the door. Against my better judgment, I opened it. He looked awful. His hair was greasy and overgrown. Stubble covered most of his face. His clothes hung off him, but it was his eyes that really bothered me. They weren't vacant exactly. They were focused somewhere beyond me, as though he was looking through the house instead of at it. "Is your mom in?" he asked. The voice was rough, slow. I recognized immediately from all the old photographs. "David?" I asked, and he blinked. "I brought the house," he said. I have no idea what that meant. His eyes just drifted past me toward the hallway and the staircase. Then he smiled slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Is she 12? he asked. My sister's 12th birthday was a week ago, but this cold feeling would wash through me. He leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Don't let the clock talk." Then I ran. My mom worked across the road, and I burst through the door of her workplace almost in tears. "David's at the house." She frowned, looking at me. "What?" "David's at the front door." For a second, she looked annoyed. "No," she said. "David's dead." I shook my head at her. "No, Mom, he's there." Something in my face and demeanor must have convinced her, because she immediately stood up and followed me outside. We hurried across the road together, and there was David, still standing there. He hadn't moved. He was facing the frosted glass of the front door, head tilted as though he was listening to something inside. My mom stopped cold. "David?" He turned around, and the look on his face changed several times in just a few seconds. Recognition, confusion, happiness, and back to nothing. "Mary?" is what he said, but that wasn't my mom's name. She ended up bringing him inside anyway, and looking back now, that's probably not what would have happened today. Somebody would have called an ambulance or social services. Back then, people just kind of dealt with things. David sat at our kitchen table while my mom made tea and tried to figure out what had happened to him. Getting answers from him was seemingly impossible. Sometimes he knew my sister's name, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he just stared at the wall for several minutes without even speaking. The only thing that ever made sense was when he tapped the side of his head and said, "The car went sideways." And that was it. Later, we learned he'd been in a serious car accident abroad and suffered a traumatic brain injury, but nobody knew how severe it was. Nobody knew who had looked after him. Nobody even knew how he'd gotten home. When my sister arrived later that day, he stared at her for a really long time, until she became uncomfortable. "You've gotten big," he said. Then, a few minutes later, he asked who she was. That night, he slept in our sitting room. None of us really slept particularly well, knowing he was under the same roof, and I remember hearing him pacing downstairs long after everybody had gone to bed. Slow footsteps back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The next morning, strange things kept turning up. Our wall clock had disappeared. Random. After searching the house, we found it carefully wrapped in towels and hidden away in a cupboard. Nobody knew why. On our kitchen table sat this brass eagle ornament and a card that read, "Welcome to your new home." It was addressed to my sister. We'd lived in that same house for years now. At the time, none of it made sense, but later we wondered if some damaged part of his mind knew her birthday was approaching and he was trying to do something kind. Maybe he remembered she existed but couldn't remember why. Maybe he knew he needed to be somewhere but couldn't remember where. Whatever was happening inside his head, it was heartbreaking and unsettling at the same time. The next morning, he left. Nobody saw him go. My mom was in the kitchen when she looked outside and he was already halfway down the road and he never even looked back. We never saw David again either. More than 20 years have passed now since that single night. I guess a few years ago, my mom ran into David's sister while shopping and she mentioned his visit to our house, and his sister casually told her that they experienced something very similar. Apparently, he'd appeared at their place around the same time, confused and disoriented, then quickly vanished again. And that was the last time anybody's heard from him or of him. I've searched online for him over the years, but there's not really anything there. No trace and no answers. I guess the strangest part to me is that he didn't really feel dangerous. He felt more lost. Completely just hopelessly lost. Like a man wandering through fragments of memories that no longer connected properly. Looking back, I suspect the news of his accident somehow became distorted through word of mouth until people believed that he actually died. Without identification and unable to explain who he was, he may have slipped through the cracks entirely. I still think about him sometimes, about the knock on the door, the way he stood outside listening to the house, about him asking if my sister was 12, and about the clock. Parts of me know what I experienced that day, and it's still totally surreal. But there's another part of me that can't help but wonder if I didn't open up that door to a ghost that odd afternoon.